Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're back in War Thunder looking at some news, and this news comes from the War Thunder forums, and it's the suggestions passed to the developers. Now, if you don't know, on the War Thunder forums, players can submit suggestions of either vehicles or mechanics or pretty much anything they want to get added to the game, and every so often, the moderators of the forum collect them together and send them off for the developers to have a look at, and then they can decide which ones they, want to put in. Now, obviously, the second stage in this whole process is actually getting this stuff past the developers, so this is seen as quite a large thing within the community. Now, something that I do want to make sure that people know is that even though these ideas are passed on to the developers, does not mean that they will necessarily come to the game. We've had a lot of vehicles, especially, which have been passed on to the developers 3 to 4 years ago at this point and have never materialized. So with that said, don't fully get your hopes up, but just understand that, hello Steam, just understand that this is like the next step, the next step in getting these vehicles into game. It's also a good place for me to actually talk about these vehicles, give a little bit of history about them, and also, their role in the game, and give my own opinion on if they should be in the game or not. So in this video, we're going to go over the aviation stuff, we're going to go over the ground stuff, and then in the second part, we're going to have a look at gameplay, Knights of the Sea stuff, so naval action, and then helicopter stuff as well. So there'll be two parts. If you want to see the helicopter and naval stuff, watch the second video. If you want to watch the other stuff, watch this video. So let's get started on the aviation things. The first one is the P75 Eagle. Now this is an American plane, and the best way to describe it is if you decided to feed a P63 steroids, a lot of steroids. So you take a King Cobra, you beef it up with with a massive engine, you put a ton of guns on it, and you unleash it. So that's basically what this plane is. First of all, it's a contra prop, so it's got a counter or a contra-rotating propeller. As you can see from this picture here, you have one propeller going one way, one going the other. If you don't know about this, think about the Wyvern in game. That has a similar setup. It's also got the engine behind the pilot, just like the King Cobras and the P39s, the Aero Cobras, and it has 1050 cals on it, because why not? So it has 650 cals which are wing mounted, and then it has 450 cals sat in the middle. It also has a capability of carrying bombs. This thing is armed to the teeth. It is definitely what we would class as a heavy fighter, and it has a lot of power behind it as well. So I think it would be fun to have in game. It was a prototype, so there was a few of them built, 14, but it was a prototype at the end of the day. There was not really, first of all, any need of it, because, well, the World War II was coming to the end. And they'd also decided to go along the P51, P47 Bearcat, Tiger Cat route instead of something like this. So generally, it wasn't required, but it's still an interesting one. It was still fully flown, it was still fully tested, so we do have a lot of flight statistics on it. When I talked to a few of my American mates who are interested in history, the way they described this was it was the American VB. Now, if you don't know what the VB is, it's the French aircraft that we have at rank, I believe it's 3, it may be 4 actually, the 4.7 ones, the big VBs with the two engines in the center of the plane. And the issues that the VBs had during testing, they had issues with their engines either tearing themselves apart or setting on fire. Now, it seems like the P75 also had issues with cooling its own, its own engine. So that may also be an issue with this. But in game, obviously, this wouldn't really be replicated. I mean, it's a huge engine. Look, an Allison V3420-23 liquid-cooled 24-cylinder double V 2,885 horsepower. This thing has a lot of power behind it, but it's also got a lot of weight. It really reminds you of those top-tier American prop planes. I think it would be a fun premium to have. and since it was built and flew, I'm completely fine with it being in the game. I've got a feeling though that if it is added, it may feel a lot like how the MB5 plays, where it just feels like it's like 10% heavier than it should be, and therefore quite hard to play. The next vehicle is the ME264. Now, if you don't know what this is, there was an idea directly from Hitler. He wanted to bomb America, and the way he wanted to do this was to create a high-altitude, large bomber so he could put big holes in American cities, kind of shock and awe in a way, also to target industry as well. This idea of a long-range heavy bomber could also be used in the European theater, so it wasn't just something that was, limited to America. But the main idea behind the directive to create the ME264 and also some other designs was for that reason. That is why whenever you read about the ME264 in books or online, you'll see a phrase come up a lot, and it's called the America Bomber. And, that's basically why. So what is this monstrosity? It's huge. This was another failed German design in order to try and create a large, heavy bomber. One thing that the Germans struggled with all through World War II was creating a large bomber which could not really go long distances, but could carry a payload which could make a massive, hole in something. When you look at the Allied side, the Americans and the British, you've got the Wellingtons, you've got the Halifax, the Sterling, the Manchester, the Lancaster, the Lincoln, I suppose, post-war. But you have all of these vehicles, and they're all designed to put massive holes in anything that is German on the ground. And this meant that from a bombing perspective, the British had quite a large advantage over the Germans, who were still running around with Ju-88s, Heinkel 111s, and so forth. Even some JU series of aircraft. And then the Americans come in with their B-17s, the B-24s mainly though, and also eventually the B-29s, and are just like, well, hello, we're here to stay, we're gonna absolutely carpet bomb the hell out of you. The one thing the Germans always struggled with was this idea of being able to put a lot of damage in a single area. This is where plans like the V-1 came from, and even the V-2 plans, and it got to a point where even before the war, you're talking about 1937, 1938, there was directives put out for large, heavy bombers, but they were just never able to create one which was seen as efficient and sustainable. And the ME264 is another one of those which was not seen as efficient or sustainable. They made 3 of these things, and all 3 versions, even though I believe at least one of them flew, it flew well, it just never took off the ground. And what I mean by that is it did fly and it was tested, but the idea itself, after building, they didn't want to put it into mass production. And I think the reason for this is, first of all, cost of resources. Second of all, the fact that by that point they were playing a much more defensive style war when this was created. And also, bombing America was much, much more of a pipe dream. The other thing which meant that the ME264 didn't have that much success was the other competing designs. And this is kind of sad for Messerschmitt in a way, because you have designs like this. This is the Focke-Wulf TA400. And this was actually favored by a lot of the generals who were working on this project. As you can see, it was supposed to be 6-engined, supposed to carry a massive load, once again, ridiculously large bomber. But this never materialized. So the fact that they had much more interest in a model like this, which wasn't even built compared to the ME264, kind of just, makes it a little bit sad for the 264, really. Even though the 264 could carry a decent bomb load, had issues with engines, but which German bomber at the time didn't. So with all that said, it's very sad for the 264. Now, yes, 3 of them were built. Yes, it was tested. Technically, by my criteria, yes, it should be in the game. There is a problem though. And the problem is that right now I would say that War Thunder doesn't really have a space for these larger bombers. The Me-264 has a very large bomb load, if it was allowed to carry it, and this is the key caveat here. Gaijin have said in the past that they use stuff like ammunition loadouts to balance machines. That is why a lot of British bombers don't have their proper bomb loads. That is why specific bombers have overloaded bomb loads compared to what they should have. This vehicle, if it was given its proper bomb load, I don't think they would allow it to have its proper bomb load, if that means. So that could be changed. So on top of this, we've also had 2 patches where we've had added 2 really good German bombers. The HU-177, the Grief, and the JU-288C, which eventually I'll do a video on. Both are amazing strike bombers. They can go incredibly fast, and they can do a lot of damage very, very quickly. And when you compare them to their counterparts, the B-17s, they beat them in every way. So it's very odd to see them at the BRs that they're at. And with that said, if the Me-264 gets added, you get 3 very large bombers, very, very instantaneously, and I feel like it's just a little bit too much for one nation. Also, with the Me-264, it just doesn't fit the game. Just like the B-29 and just like the Tu-4. Like, I personally think that the Tu-4 and the B-29, the additions of them was a bad idea. Just because they don't fit in air realistic. They don't fit in ground realistic. They don't really fit in any game mode in a big way. And I feel like the 264 would unfortunately have that problem as well. The next plane to look at is the Hawker Hurricane Mark II-C. Now this is actually done by Vex Viper Tiffs, and he hit me up on Discord ages ago, 5 months ago, and asked me if I'd have a look at it and do a video on it. And guess what? I did. It's right here. So, my video is actually in the forum post talking about, my opinions. And this post is thorough. Like, it has pretty much everything, when it comes to the Mark II-C. Now, I'll give you a general rundown of the II-C. It was the most produced Hawker Hurricane. It was the first one which truly embraced the idea of ground attack. As you may know, as the Hurricanes went on, we produced a lot of them, but they were seen as inferior to other machines. So the Spitfire, of course, and then you had stuff even like the Typhoon, the Tempest, things like this came along, and the Hawker Hurricane was a pre-World War II aircraft, and the design itself, it was not worth carrying on. It would be much better to go along the Spitfire design line, and that's exactly what they did. So with the Hurricanes, they were relegated to other roles. So night fighters, ground attackers, stuff which, if a Spitfire was used for, would take it away from the air battle. So that's why Typhoons and Hurricanes and things like that were used in ground attack roles after when they were seen as useful. So basically, in the North African campaign, the Hurricanes were used a lot in ground attack purposes. During the D-Day landings, you have the Typhoons being used a lot for those ground attack purposes as well. It's not a slight on the aircraft, it's just kind of a sign of the times. If you've got an aircraft that you built a ton of, and you still want to use it, but you know for a fact that the enemy is upgraded and they've been able to upgrade to a point where they will dance around your aircraft, it is generally better to relegate that aircraft to a different role so you are not sending your pilots out on a suicide mission. It's the same as tanks. Think about the Covenanter. The Covenanter never entered service, but when it was first produced, when it was first, not really supposed to go into service, but when it was ready to go into service, the only thing the German tanks had was a 37mm. So the armor on the Covenanter was pretty good at dealing with the 37mm. On top of this, it had the 40mm, the 2-pounder, which could outrange the 37mm, had a bit of speed behind it. Yes, it had some technical issues, but overall, at the time it was produced, it was a good tank. The problem is it didn't fight, or wasn't supposed to fight when it was produced. The issue with the Covenanter was The first time it would be able to fight was about 8 months after it was ready to go. So, and by that point, the Germans had upgraded their armor, added extra armor to their Panzer IIIs and IVs, and were starting to use the 50mm and the short-barreled 75, which dicks on the Covenanter. So the Covenanter wasn't future-proofed, but at the time, it was, when it was produced, it was good. Now, on top of this, with the Covenanter, they found secondary roles. It was relegated to different roles. So it was relegated to defensive missions in England, so actually following along stuff like trains and everything to make sure they were not sabotaged, and it was used for training. The Hurricane, in that sense, it was a fighter aircraft. It was relegated to other roles as well. So you can see how they're quite similar. So the Mark IIC, they changed the wing design slightly. They also elongated the nose, and they gave it 4 20mm. They also gave us some hard points on the wings, and what this meant was you would be able to carry bombs. So once again, fully trying to get into that ground attack idea. I also believe they could mount rockets on it. But since it was the most prolific, well, not prolific, but the most made one, we'll say, the largest variant one, yes, it should be in the game. The next vehicle is a Japanese torpedo bomber, the C6N, C6N1B, or C6N1S. Now, it is kind of interesting how we have 3 separate names for the same vehicle. There was literally only one of these made, so pick a name. But this is a torpedo bomber. You know how we have the B5N2 in game? The B5N2 has no offensive armaments, and it only has one turret in the back. Well, welcome to its bigger brother. This is the C6N1, and with it, it has a very powerful engine for what it is. It has a Nakajima NK9H Homer, and that has 1455 kilowatts, or nearly 2,000 horsepower worth of power. Has a 3-man crew, but the main thing is it only has a 7.92 on the back of it. No offensive armament, only a torpedo or bombs to be used. Now, the B5N2, I am not that interested in because of this. I think it's a very one-dimensional vehicle. There's not really a lot you can do with it, and this vehicle would be the same. And since there was only one of them made, I think other stuff should be prioritized, I think is the best way I can put it. With only having one vehicle made, it would have to be a special vehicle which was really well tested and really interesting before I would put it to the top of the list of stuff to be added, and even at the bottom of the list. Personally, I wouldn't add this thing because the playstyle doesn't fit the game. And if you want it to fit the game, guess what? You've already got the B5, so just use the B5 instead. For me, it would just be a vehicle that I would have to be forced to be researched through again. The next one's another Japanese vehicle, and I don't really know what to make of this one. So the Ki-84 Tai is the one that we're looking at here, and this is obviously one of the upgrades to the Ki-84. Now, the issue with the Ki-84s that we have, the Hai and this one, the Tai, we don't really have any pictures of them. And the only real difference is the guns. When it comes to performance, the performance is exactly the same. So the Tai, which you see here, the Hayate, which is the one that is, the blog is about, it has 520mm HO5 guns, or HO5s. And what is interesting is the fifth one is stuck out the top in a Shrug music formation. So you can see here, this is supposed to be a 20mm looking upwards. So the only reason to add this machine in game is to add a 20mm Shrug music cannon. Now, the problem with this is I don't remember the last time somebody used the Shrug music stuff, since it isn't very good. On top of this, it's quite hard to use. On top of everything, the bomber you're trying to hit normally can hit you anyway, so even though it's an interesting idea, I'm not sure it is the correct idea, because the Tai, we already have a Ki-84 in game that has no information on it. Hardly, I think there might be one picture on it, and that's it, and that's the Hai, sorry. So adding the Tai, when all we have is this, which could literally mean anything, since we have no information on it, I would personally say no to that one. The S55X. I don't know who decided that this would be a good aircraft to put in game, but I am interested. Now, this is a flying boat. Now I'm going to show you a picture of said flying boat. This massive Mamba Jamba is the flying boat. It's got a push-pull engine, so there's that. It is absolutely huge, and for wartime uses, it was given... Oops, let's just zoom out a little bit. It was given 4 7.7mm machine guns. It could carry a torpedo or 2,000 kilos worth of bombs, which I would say is a little bit optimistic, but it could do it. It was a cantilever shoulder wing monoplane with twin hulls and delicate booms supporting a twin fin triple rudder tail assembly. So it has a lot of interesting ideas on it. I feel like it would be an absolute arse to model, but we do have a plane in game which is very similar to it, the MBR, which is a rank 1 Soviet gift aircraft. I think overall, with the push-pull engines, it is it's kind of a crazy plane, but you can see where at least one of the 7s is supposed to be, on the front here. And I suppose if you want to add in a cool gift vehicle, this is the one you add, right? This is the ridiculousness that you add. It would definitely get people's ears up. I would definitely enjoy using it. The next one is an abomination, I think is the best way of putting it, and I can't believe it's been accepted. Or not accepted, but passed on to the devs. The Capra R40. Now, the Capra R40 is a Warhammer machine. I think is the best way of putting it. If you decided that you wanted to make up a fantasy machine with a ridiculous amount of guns on it, with a ridiculous amount of technology on it, and all of this rubbish, and then never let it fly, and then say, hey, later down the line, let's stick it in War Thunder because it'll be fun. No, I'm not in the mood for that. This reminds me of a lot of the proposed German designs, where what they do is they slap a bunch of guns on something, slap a bunch of engines, say that it's aerodynamically sound, and then make up a proposed ridiculous amount of numbers about it and just say what it was supposed to do. This is something that Blom and Voss were very famous for. It's also something that Messerschmitt was famous for in the later parts of the war, and also other machines as well, such as the later tier Focke-Wulfs. I do not believe anything on this plane, because all of the research I've done on it says that it was never completed, and the only ones which were completed were the ones that you see before you, which were a wooden mock-up. Now, this is what I want to make sure that you know. Even though these pictures may look like it's made out of metal, and maybe some of the parts are made out of metal, such as the engine, maybe over here, this is a wooden mock-up. This was not produced. I cannot find anything on if an actual one was properly produced of this aircraft, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't.